Hi, Stephen. Jonathan Pickup. Welcome to the Architectural Technologist podcast. I really appreciate having you here. Steven Puri, you're an expert in remote working, and I'm really interested. Please introduce yourself.
You know what? I'm happy to be here. I hope that we can share some stuff that's super engaging and fun, but also prescriptively helpful. My background is I was originally an engineer. I came up as a little code monkey when I was young, ended up going to USC in Los Angeles and was there when film went digital. So I got into film. So the second arc of my career was, oh, now we're doing CG films. I did that as I was executive vice president for Kurtz Morrison at DreamWorks Pictures. I'm a vice president at 20th Century Fox, Die Hard, Wolverine, stuff like that. And then I got back into technology before the pandemic. And the past 6 years, what I've been studying very closely and developing a platform around is how do we adapt to the new world of remote, hybrid, and in-office work and make each optimized for what is appropriate. So yeah, super happy to be here.
The Architectural Technologist podcast, really about architecture and architectural technologists and how we work. I'm super curious. I know how I remote work, but a lot of architects don't think of remote working at the moment. Do you think it's important that they do?
The way I think of it is this, is in the old world, right? We had a very commonly accepted post-industrial revolution idea of we live this distance from a common location where we go together, right? And then when Zoom became a verb during the pandemic, for many verticals, including architecture, there was this notion of, oh, what tools do we need in order to work remotely? We can't be together, we'll kill each other. And now the pendulum has swung back towards the middle, where I think you have a lot of companies, a lot of leaders that have a different color on their palette. If 10 years ago, most verticals, let's say the leaders had like reds and yellows and they could paint sunrises and sunsets. And now suddenly with the pandemic, this set of tools around, oh, you can be hybrid or remote. It's like they got blue added to the palette so they can paint lakes or rivers. And I think as a leader, it's your ability to say, when is which color appropriate? And as an individual contributor, if you were actually doing the design, doing the architecture, then it's saying, oh, in this period, here's how I contribute in the best way to a team when I might not see them every day. So a lot of what I've studied is flow states, deep work, and how do you do the things, as Cal Newport would say, that are not just the shallow work of, oh, I emptied my inbox, Jonathan. Are you proud of me?
So I think that raises some questions. So if we start working remotely, is that going to change the design of cities?
Absolutely. If you think about in human history, in the history of organization and civilization, let's say, you can see in urban design how far someone lives from where they need to be, the marketplace where they have to sell their cows, whatever, the factory where they have to go to make bolts for their Model T, whatever the thing is. And as transportation has evolved, I get there by foot, I get there with an animal, I get there with the car, I get there with the train, I get there with the plane. You see how it maintains this common sense, like here's the amount of time that humans want to spend in order to travel to place of work. So that's been very common, and the statistics on that. The thing that I think is so interesting now is to say, like when I set up my first company, when I left Fox and I set up a tech company, it was amazing to me to say, there's a great designer in Dubai who can be part of my team. I found an amazing front-end engineer in Montreal who could be part of my team. So that way in which we start to think about, oh, there is someone who is part of my firm, my architectural firm, my team that is not here, but how do I create the conditions where they can do great work? It fundamentally changes how we're going to work. There are people from the old guard that are not going to embrace that and are not. Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase is a brilliant businessman, has led that company to great success. Absolutely, you need to be here or I'm going to fire you or kill you. Like he's a very outspoken guy. I think there are other leaders coming up that they were raised on this idea of like flow states. And I don't know how much, I've listened to a few of your podcast episodes, but I don't know how much you've really touched on flow states for the kind of creative deep work. Should we talk about that at all?
Yeah, we haven't really talked about flow states. And I was actually talking to someone you and I had a quick chat online the other day.
Yeah.
And after we spoke, I was talking to someone and flow states came to mind because she was talking about how she gets into a flow of things and needs to do stuff. It's like, that's the flow state Stephen's talking about.
Okay. This might be helpful. Those who are listening in their cars or at home, I hope this is an important thing for your life. So Hungarian psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, took me many years to learn how to say that properly. He wrote the seminal work on this called Flow. And his thesis was there are high performers who get into a concentrated state and do the kind of work that move themselves or the world forward. How do they do that? He wanted to figure out the systems in place that allowed that. And like Prometheus, bring that back to the rest of us. It's an amazing book. I'll be very reductive here, so I apologize. It's not the 2-hour seminar on flow states. But what he learned was this. He said, yes, these people in various disciplines, athletes, artists, scientists, inventors, they do create this state for themselves where their efforts are almost magnified. And he said, I'm going to name this flow because I love the metaphor of your energy of paddling is magnified through the river starts to carry you forward. And many people call this different things. I don't know with your international audience, how many people know Michael Jordan, who's a big NBA basketball player, but he's this famous quote of being in the zone. And that's what he called it. When he said, I get to a point where it's me and the ball. There are no defenders. There are no spectators. There is no scoreboard. And he's like, when I'm in that state, I'm unstoppable. And that was the zone for him. Picasso had a great quote about when I've been up all night. I forgot to pee. I didn't eat or drink water, but hey, Guernica, what do you think? Do you like it? And those kind of moments when you go, wow, I've lost track of time. This is one of the things that Mihaly noticed. You lose track of time, distractions get blocked out. You are able to go for long periods of time, singularly focused, you're monotasking. And in that exploration, he said, there are ways in which you can make the conditions precedent to either do it yourself, or if you're a leader of a team, suppose you have a leader of designers and architects, right? You're saying, how do I make this available to my team? Because I would much rather have a staff meeting where someone shows something that alters the shape of our company, the trajectory we were on, rather than everyone comes there and goes, I filed my TPS reports and I returned my emails and my Slack is all done. Who cares? Honestly, like I appreciate that, but I want someone to sit in the meeting and say something where someone goes, wow, you've changed where we are going as a company. And that often comes out of flow states. And that's not done in 15-minute increments. That is, as a leader, making time to say, I trust you. Go take 2 hours or 3 hours. We're not going to bug you. Go think.
I had a very inspirational tutor when I was at university. His name
Cool.
was Claude Mixon. And he said that he would work. And then he said, because he was talking about flow, but he didn't have a name for it. But he was talking about, he's working on these drawings, he's working on this design, he's going through different options. He said, and then about 2:00 in the morning, everything just came together as if magic. It just all came, it was like magic. It all came together. And I've had that several times where you're working on something, you're distracted and you don't realize, and you come back and you look at what you've done. And you're like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. I have no idea where this stuff came from, but it's that flow state. It's that flow. What I'll do, I think, is I found the book online. I'll put a link in the show notes.
Brilliant. Yes.
So that people can get access to that book and find out about it. But yeah, I agree with that. The question is, if flow is so important, and it really is important for architectural design, not so much documentation, but certainly design, how do we then teach our students to get into that flow state?
It is such a good question because there is a wealth of writing on how distracted the generation that's coming up is, right? We have in the past 10, 15 years incentivized the smartest designers and engineers to work for companies whose business model is steal your life, right? And whether you're talking Meta, you're talking Snap, you're talking TikTok, they have the money and the stock options, the RSUs, whatever they're giving out to say, this is the best paycheck you can get. Jonathan, you're super smart. If you can help us get 1 more second of time on site, time and app from 1 billion people, we'll make sure your grandchildren don't need to work, right? So they've attracted the best behavioral psychologists, designers, engineers to do that. And that is simply their model saying, hey, 25-year-old, tell you what, if you give me your life, I'm going to sell it over here to this company. I'll keep the money, but you'll get some fun content of people juggling chainsaws and doing stupid things with Logan Paul, right? So when you think about that, which is fundamentally different than you and I growing up, right? You say, okay, so if that is how they're taking in information, what are the other like revolutions in how we take in information? And I'll point one out because I was part of this, which is When MTV came up, it really changed the rate at which we assimilate visual information, right? There was suddenly this MTV cutting style, and you went from cinematic cutting, cut to you, cut to me talking, cut to the window, to these rapid cuts, jump cuts, stutter cuts, things like that. And initially it was very jarring. I was like, oh my God, this is the destruction of narratives, visual narratives. And it turned out to be an evolution, right? We may look at that to find parallels to what's happening now. It's just to say that cutting style did not go away. Now you find it in Johnson & Johnson commercials for shampoo, but it evolved how we interpret that. So to come with all of that table set, let's come back to your question. So how does this new generation learn to access flow states, learn to do the things that move their life forward? And I think it's by offering tools that are similar to the ones that are so addictive. As I developed one of those tools. There are many great tools out there, and I encourage people to find the one that works for them. But simple ideas around gamification, like it or not. Duolingo is a huge successful company, and their business model is not steal your life to sell it to advertisers because we want you to be watching stupid videos. It is, hey, you want to learn a language? Guess what? We're going to apply really smart behavioral levers with gamification, with badges, with points, these things to make you want to do it. And they did a great job. There are other learning platforms that have done that and said, rather than rail against the stars, how do we build this in such a way this generation recognizes this? And that I think is really powerful. And we haven't even talked about AI yet, but I'm sure you're going to weave that in here because we chatted about that the other day. That I think is how you do it, is you have to acknowledge the world has changed.
So if we come back to what we started talking about, which was working remotely, that I'm sure that some people are going to say, I'd love to work remotely, but what tools am I going to use? We're currently having an interview using a tool called GoToMeeting. There's
Yes.
Zoom, there's Google Meets, there's heaps of these things.
Yes.
Yeah, would you say Zoom became a verb? Yeah, just like Google did.
Just like Google did. Yes.
So are there any special techniques that we need to learn, or is there just so many that it doesn't matter which one we talk about?
I can answer that from the point of view of a leader who's trying to do great things for their team and the contributor who is trying to contribute to their team. All right. So let me give you a short answer on both sides, which is if one acknowledges that flow states require 15 to 25 minutes to fall into one, right? Even with maybe the right music playing that helps you get there, with blocking your distractions. There's a lot of research on this. 15 to 25 minutes. And then if you're in a flow state and you get interrupted, oh, Jonathan, can you send me that report from the other day? And you've got to go find the report, Slack it to someone. It takes you another 15 to 25 to get back there, right? So we acknowledge this is not something you can easily be interrupted doing. So as a leader, one of the most powerful things you can do is say, hey, why don't we as a team agree upon a couple of hours, 1-2 hours during the day, when we're each going to do the things that move our company forward, as opposed to return emails. And this is not for salespeople. Obviously, this is not for people who are just on Zooms all day selling stuff, right? I'm talking about the people who are designing the future, writing about the future, right? So that requires a couple things. If you're a leader, you need to get buy-in. You need to say, hey, here's what this time is for, and I trust you. You need to hire properly. Like often when you hear leaders say, oh, everyone needs to be in the office, they're speaking from fear. They're speaking from, if I cannot see you, how do I know you're not running to the bank, going to the beach, taking a nap, doing your laundry, right? That's not a remote work problem. That's a hiring problem. If that's a valid concern of yours, you need to look at whom you're hiring. So as a leader, you need to say these flow states, these deep work moments, and Cal Newport has written brilliant stuff about this in his book called Deep Work. You can't do it in between Zooms. So Zoom, as much as it became a verb when we were laughing about that, when you schedule your team, or it's every hour or two, there's a Zoom meeting, you're not really going to get people who go into a state of flow. So that's one thing to consider. The same thing if you're an individual contributor. If you're actually doing the work, doing the designs, writing the thing, you need to look at your day and try to guard that time. Like, for example, in my company, from 9 to 11 in the morning, we don't set meetings. I won't meet with you, Jonathan. I won't talk to my colleagues. I won't Slack them and ask them for things. That's sacred. Do something meaningful. Think. And I hope that answers the question, both on the leadership side as well as the contributor side.
It can take sometimes years to create the documentation for a large scale project. And even a domestic project can take months to generate the documentation. And you have to think in 3 dimensions and get all the connections and then describe those connections using graphics.
You've talked about
And
that in a recent episode. You talked about that, being able to fall into that space where in your mind, you can visualize the 3D space. And it's true.
Which is our flow state. For that project, that would be our flow state, being able to think through those things. So you need to have lots of flow states, probably every day, to resolve those things. What you're saying to me is that you have to, so the contributor doing the work has to really guard the time so they can get into that flow state.
Yes. And know thyself.
And the leader has to trust the people he's employing.
Yeah.
So I'm working remotely with an American architect, and we have meetings where we discuss what we're going to do, and we close the meeting, and then it's up to me to do what he knows I can do. Worked with him for a long time, so he trusts that I'm going to do a good job and I'm going to solve the problems that are there.
Yeah.
So we have this great leader. He's the leader. I'm the contributor. I do set times aside, and we're using a calendar at the moment. So we're using Google Calendar.
I've heard of it.
He can see it. I can make appointments. It has the ability to make a Google Meet straight away. So we can set up a meeting. He can see my screen. I can see his. We can share that way. And then I block out times that say I'm busy. Now, he has to trust that I'm going to be doing the work in a timely way. And based on what we've done, we have that. But he also has to trust that I'm busy doing something either effective for him or effective for another one of my clients. So those are a couple of the techniques we use. I used to always use GoToMeeting for doing that. I still use GoToWebinar for group activity. There are lots of paid things that you can have for a large team, Slack, Monday.com, those kinds of things. And if you need a big team, they would be the things. I'm curious, just going back to the pandemic where we all had to work from home, I heard statistics that said that productivity for a lot of people went up when they were working from home.
Shocking.
Do you have any feedback on that?
Yes, you were spot on. And again, there are a lot of studies about how is this possible, because there was the fear of, what are you doing? I don't know what you're doing. You're probably not doing what you need to be doing, which, as we talked about, really comes down to trust, which when you were talking about your relationship, you said trust several times. That was a key part of how you can do what you do. You have earned that. And you trust the firm with which you're working, that they're being genuine about here's what needs to be done. And you're sending on missions that are meaningful. By the way, to loop this back to flow states, one of the things that Mihaly found was you have to believe the thing you're doing has meaning. You cannot randomly be doing some task and dive into a flow state if you don't believe it's meaningful. And it's a fascinating book where he talks about these various things. And let me add 2 more to that, which may be interesting for your audience. 2 other things he found were you have to have skills that apply. And that is to say, Michael Jordan is not going to fall into a flow state painting, nor is Picasso playing basketball. If I were to ask you something that was not related to your motorbike or related to architectural writing, you might have a harder time getting a flow state because you're like, I'm just not a rock climber. I'm just not a hiker. I'm just not a yoga person. I'm just not a whatever blogger about social media. So that's not going to happen for you, whereas it may happen for me. And the other thing is, in addition to having skills that apply toward it, it has to be at the level of being challenging. So if you're doing the exact same thing 30 years in a row, you're probably not going to get into a flow state. You may get into a rote mannerism of how to write the thing that you write. What was interesting is it is at that moment of I'm being challenged to actually apply my skills at a high level that you get into flow. And I'll give you an example from my life. I first experienced a flow state where I was like, what is this? And I didn't know the name. I was on a flight from Austin, Texas, where I'm now, to San Francisco. And I was in Figma. I had to revise some designs to illustrate this idea that I had because I was going to meet with my team in SF. The flight took off from Austin and landed. And I was sure the engine had gone out. We were in Dallas. Like something bad had happened because we took off and landed. I looked down, 2 hours and 40 minutes had gone by. If you'd asked me, I would have said 10. My designs were done. It was challenging for me to do. I believed it was meaningful because I thought it was something that would move our company forward. And I'd used music to help block my distractions because the plane is noisy. I didn't really want to talk to anyone. So I had headphones on with music in, And a lot of these things that now I recognize, wow, I created the conditions precedent that Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi talks about on this flight. And it was an amazing feeling. Where at the end of it, I actually landed at SFO and I didn't have to race to my hotel to go try and finish the designs for tomorrow morning. Actually, there's a great place by the airport that has New England lobster rolls, which I love. And I had time to casually go there and have dinner and go to the hotel. So if you've experienced that, it's something you probably want to repeat. And that really set me on as a little journey of, okay, what is this thing? And how do I productize it? How do I take these things that he wrote about and say, here's a simple website that'll help you get into flow. That's really been a mission for me of how do you take this stuff and make it available? And happily, a lot of smart people have written about this. So there's a lot, which we can link to in the show notes.
So I keep all of my notebooks. And I used to do a lot of flying around New Zealand. I used to do user groups or group meetings to teach this CAD software that I teach. And I would go and I'd have to fly to Auckland, it's an hour, and I'd fly to Wellington, it's an hour, and I'd fly to Christchurch. And I'd go to all these different places. And I found that you're on the plane on your own. You've got headphones in, I've got my notebooks. Recently, I've been looking through my old notebooks and I can't believe how it doesn't look like I've written them. I look at the flow of information that's on them and I'm thinking, that is such a good way to teach
Wow.
this program. And I was like, what happened to me? Because I don't think I can think like that anymore.
That I can't speak to, but I'm glad in those notebooks you wrote stuff that you're proud of.
Yeah. And they changed the course of my manuals dramatically.
There you go.
I'd been reading, what's the guy's name? Edward de Bono. So Edward de Bono wrote this thing about simplicity and teaching backwards. And I couldn't figure that out. And I was thinking about it. And then I came up with this idea and it just structured my whole manual and made it really easy for someone to learn a little bit here. And we just built on this thing until finally it was a complex 3D object. And we just carried on doing the same thing all the way through.
I love how you take that framework for structuring thought and apply it there. I'll tell you, in my life, I spent over a decade developing films, right? Some better than others, let's be honest, but doing that. And what I thought was very interesting was this, is when you really examine a good film, it's not about the plot. It is about a character who has a flaw. And the great films, you are waiting to see, will he or her overcome that flaw? Will this be a success or a tragedy? And that, for me, was a framework that I applied in my current company, where I built my company backwards from the pain that I felt. What are the problems I have? It was how I learned. I was medically diagnosed with ADHD. I procrastinate. I get overwhelmed. And I had to admit this to myself and say, how does that manifest? Just like in a movie. In the beginning of the movie, you see the character and you have to tip the audience off. Here's what's wrong with her. Here's what's wrong with him. This is why this could go south. And for me, it was very much a cold start problem in the morning. Jonathan, I would tell myself tomorrow at 9, I'm going to get going on this thing. And at 9:15, I'd find myself checking emails still or checking Twitter or something to stay up on the news. And when I dug down, peeled back the layers of the onion, why am I doing this? Why as I say I'm going to start at 9, but I'm actually at 9:30, just kind of like wrapping the news. It was procrastination. Why am I procrastinating? You're procrastinating because you're overwhelmed. Why am I overwhelmed? And it came down to one of two things. Either I looked at my task list and I said, there's so many things on there. I don't know how I'll get them all done. I don't even know where to begin. And that paralysis stopped me from doing as much as I could. Or I looked at one thing on there that was overwhelming. Oh, write my book. I'm not going to write my book between now and my noon lunch. And that sort of working backwards, like you were saying, thinking backwards about how you structure it. That for me was very much how I structured building what I built, which was just saying, what is the thing I've learned from film? Oh, it's the great stories are built from really flawed characters. And then how do those characters overcome them?
I wonder, you were talking about your book. We haven't mentioned your book before.
My platform. Yeah.
Your platform. Put a link in the show notes to that. Stephen, I think we've probably reached a nice part here. I'd love to have you talk about what we need to do to teach students to cope with these things. We talked about a lot of things, the flow state, the procrastination, being distracted. So we must have a lot of students. I'd love to focus on the architectural students first, but how do we get them to develop that flow state?
Okay, so I have a question for you first. And by the way, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me back. I'm very flattered. And I have grown wiser since we last spoke. So The question I want to ask you to begin, what do you view, because you're very close to these students, what do you view as the greatest challenge today that's maybe different than when you and I were coming up as students?
I went to architecture school, not polytechnic. And in architecture school, we had tutors who would talk to you, not with you. And now students at tertiary institutes, particularly polytechs, expect
What does that mean?
that we're almost equals. We're friendly with each other. When I went to university,
Interesting.
I knew that my tutors knew a lot more than I did.
Right.
But polytechnic students seem to think that I only know a little bit more than they do. So when they're learning about architecture, which is a very technical but artistic profession. So there's the art of design, there's the 3D thinking, but there's also the 2D documentation, which has to comply with building codes, city laws, and physics. It's things like keeping water out, metals that
Mhm.
can't touch each other. There's a
Sure.
lot of highly technical stuff that they need to learn, a little bit of chemistry. They need to learn a bit of science. Where does the sun come from? Where does water vapor come from? There's a whole raft of these things. Yeah, it's a textbook. We should
Yeah.
buy
No, you
textbooks.
did a good
Uh,
episode on textbooks.
so a student needs to learn an awful lot. It's a highly technical thing. And what they forget is that I've done all of this and I've done it for longer than most of them have been alive. And so they sometimes don't think that I know as much as I do. And therefore they don't listen to it or they don't ask about it. But I'd love you to weigh in on that.
Let's draw a little bifurcation between knowledge and wisdom. Okay. And knowledge, let's define that as things that can be memorized. Knowledge, like you said, don't put this metal by that metal. Buildings are going to heat on this side towards the equator, not the other side. Whatever the important considerations are, you know them better than I, right? So there's knowledge. And then there's wisdom, which is here is how, as a thinker, I can apply knowledge. And there are many ways to define this, but for our conversation, for this answer, let's just draw that simple distinction, right? It is amazing that in contrast to when you and I were coming up, now almost all knowledge is available in seconds. It's so well cataloged, so classified. There's taxonomies that define everything. So you can find knowledge. So for your students, that is amazing on some level. I think if I were a student today, how great it would be to be able to know anything, right? But the thing that is so interesting, and the distinction really, I think, between you and a student, and maybe the students need to understand this in a way, is that it is not just knowledge that builds a building, a bridge, a mine, a tunnel, a spaceship. Like it is the wisdom that says this is how that knowledge is applicable in this particular application. And that's where you get into those interesting challenges of, I know that there's this bit of knowledge you're applying, but actually in the larger world, that knowledge is subordinate to this knowledge, but you have to be wise to know that. So I would offer this thought, which is if we start to think of higher education as learning to think as opposed to learning to know, that starts to accord you the respect that you deserve, which is, hey, here's how you apply all this knowledge that's now free to anyone, right? Anyone can Google how to be an architect, let's be honest. You can start to read about all these structural codes and things like that. You can have ChatGPT tell you what's going on, or Perplexity, whatever you use. But it really comes down to that thing of like, at a more complex, sophisticated level, how do you apply wisdom? How do you think? And that I think is still super applicable. And that's going to differentiate people in the hiring process, because leaders like you at a firm are going to seek people to hire who know how to think, because you don't need to hire people because of what they know.
I love your distinction between knowledge and wisdom. So knowledge, as you say, any knowledge is totally available on your phone now. Everything you ever want to know, available on your phone. But wisdom is how to apply that knowledge. And that's the thing that tertiary education is supposed to do, is supposed to teach people how to think, how to take knowledge.
That is what we aspire to.
Yeah.
To be a great thinker, not a great memorizer.
But a lot of my students struggle to think. They can all go get the knowledge, but they really struggle to synthesize that knowledge into something else.
And that is, I didn't know this. You and I didn't talk about this. My mother was a teacher. Is probably why I have such a high regard for education, because she instilled in me the sense of, you will have teachers that want you to memorize things. Smile, nod, go to their class, get an A. You will have a couple of teachers that inspire you to think. Do everything you can to be close to them.
But that would be a lovely thing to get to your end of your life and say, I inspired people to be better. Wouldn't that be a nice thing to finish up with?
Jonathan, that's what I'm doing with my life. I'm building a whole platform to help people do something. Like I have a strong thesis that we all have something great inside us. And the question of this lifetime is, will we get it out? I made a platform for the people who want to do something great to do it, as opposed to sit on the sofa and scroll through TikTok.
So I notice in classrooms, quite often students don't have the skills to avoid distraction. So they tend to get distracted. They tend to procrastinate. They've got too much on their list to do because they might be doing 4 papers. Each paper's got an assignment to be done, or there's 3 assignments. They're all due at different times. They're all got different things.
Sure.
So really, I guess what I'm thinking is that there should have been a class that taught them how to get into that flow state, how to stop procrastinating, how to manage their distraction.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, I think it would be. I think maybe that's what we're missing for really making our world move forward, is getting people to become better humans, better at thinking, better at using wisdom instead of knowledge.
You just said, full stop, hang a lantern on it. If you can find the people as you're coming, and for those who are listening that are still going through their educational process, to find the teachers that inspire you to think, that is your goal.
I really appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed spending time with you. I wish you all the best. I'm going to put the link to your platform in the show notes, and I really appreciate having you here. So thank you very much.
It was great. Jonathan, thank you so much.